It's the slavery era in Southern America. It's nighttime, and a white wife is wearing a dress she did not wear for a long time. She is doing this to be unrecognizable once she goes out of the home. She silently comes to her white husband, who is sleeping on the bed, and takes some money out of his wallet. She ensures that her children are asleep, and there is no servant around who would see her leaving the house. But where is she going? Well, her friends had told her about the Southern brothels, run by white women, where black male slaves are made to satisfy whoever goes there. They said it was not risky, and the owners of the brothels made secrecy their priority. But how did all that work? How did white women go to these Southern brothels to satisfy the cravings they could not satisfy with their white husbands? Let's know about that in this video.
The Black History Archives.
Not all white women could afford to have black male slaves around them in their homes. Even if they could have it, it was highly risky to establish sexual relationships with them without getting caught. Unless white wives had some kind of leverage over their husbands, like holding the secrets of their affairs, they could not freely use black male slaves for sexual pleasures. However, for them, there was a solution. In the shadowy corners of the American South during the era of slavery, there existed a disturbing and largely unspoken network of brothels where black male slaves were forced into sexual servitude to satisfy the forbidden desires of white women. These brothels were kept secret, operating in hidden locations where the rigid racial and sexual boundaries of the time could be temporarily crossed, but in the most exploitative and dehumanizing ways. These secret establishments were different from the more widely known brothels, where enslaved women were exploited for the pleasure of white men. The brothels that catered to white women seeking black male slaves operated under a veil of discretion, as the societal taboo against interracial relationships, especially those initiated by white women, was profoundly strong. The mere thought of a white woman engaging in sexual relations with a black man was considered not only immoral, but also a severe breach of social norms and laws that could lead to harsh consequences. The brothels were often located in remote areas, away from the prying eyes of society, or in basements and back rooms of safe establishments. These locations were chosen to ensure that the activities within remained hidden from the public, and that the women who visited could maintain their reputations in their communities. The operations of these brothels were supported by a network of people who facilitated the transportation and exploitation of enslaved men, often for significant sums of money. A complete record of this information can be found in the book Sexual Politics of the Slave Trade, History and Legacy by April D. DeConnick, which discusses the sexual exploitation of both male and female slaves. Also the books Race and Sexual Power in Early America by Jennifer L. Morgan and They Were Her Property by Stephanie Jones Rogers offer deep insights into this subject. White women, often from the upper echelons of society, visited these secretive establishments to exercise control over black male slaves, indulging in their illicit cravings away from the prying eyes of society. Once behind closed doors, these women assumed complete dominance over the black male slaves, engaging in acts that not only satisfied their sexual desires, but also reinforced the deeply embedded racial hierarchies of the time. When white women entered these brothels, they stepped into a space where they could momentarily escape the societal expectations imposed upon them. In the seclusion of these hidden rooms, with no one to hold them accountable, these women indulged in their fantasies with black male slaves who had no agency or power to resist. The rooms in these brothels were not just spaces for sexual encounters. They were places where the dynamics of power, race, and control played out in the most intimate and disturbing ways. Here's a reminder to please support us so we can make more videos for you by subscribing to our channel and giving the video a like. We want to build a strong community, and we need your support. Let's continue now. Once alone with a black male slave, these women exerted their authority in a variety of ways. They would often order the black male slaves to perform acts that emphasized their power and the men's subjugation. This could include anything from forcing the men to kneel, to humiliating them verbally, to engaging in sexual acts that highlighted the inversion of societal roles. The enslaved men, aware of the dire consequences of resistance, complied with these demands, knowing that any sign of defiance could result in severe punishment or even death. The actions of these women were not just about sexual satisfaction, they were also about the thrill of exercising complete control over another human being. In a society where white women were often subject to the control of white men, these encounters provided a rare opportunity for them to assert dominance, but over individuals who were already brutally oppressed. Interestingly, these brothels were not just frequented by women of lower social standing. Many visitors were women from the upper classes, who were drawn to the brothels by the attraction of the forbidden and the desire to break free from the rigid constraints of their social world. These women, often trapped in loveless or sexually unfulfilling marriages, saw these encounters as a way to reclaim a sense of control over their lives and bodies. For these high-class women, the act of visiting a brothel and selecting a black male slave for sexual gratification was a form of rebellion against the social norms that dictated their lives. It was a way to momentarily escape the role of dutiful wife and to step into a role where they held the power. In the brothels, these women were not bound by the rules of society. They were free to explore their desires and to engage in acts that would have been unthinkable in their public lives. The racial dynamics of these encounters added another layer of complexity. In a society where racial segregation and the strict enforcement of racial hierarchies were the norms, the act of a white woman engaging in sexual relations with a black man was a direct challenge to these boundaries. However, because these encounters occurred within the context of slavery, where black men had no power or agency, the societal hierarchies were ultimately reinforced rather than subverted. The white women's dominance over the enslaved men was a stark reminder of the pervasive racial inequalities that defined the era. While the brothels served as places where white women could exercise control over black men, they were also spaces where the contradictions and tensions of the racial and sexual dynamics of the time were laid bare. The fact that these brothels existed at all is a testament to how the rigid social norms of the era could be bent or broken in private, even as they were strictly enforced in public. For the white women who visited these brothels, the experience was one of illicit pleasure and power. They could step outside the confines of their socially prescribed roles and explore desires that were otherwise repressed or denied. However, these acts were always grounded in the racial hierarchies that defined the society in which they lived. The very act of choosing a black man to satisfy their desires was an assertion of their racial superiority, even as it was a challenge to the gender norms of the time. For the enslaved men, these brothels were places of profound suffering. They were forced to engage in acts that were both physically and emotionally degrading, with no hope of escape. These men were often selected for this role based on their physical strength, youth, and perceived sexual virility. Once chosen, they were subjected to repeated sexual exploitation, with no means of escape or recourse. The psychological toll of being used in such a manner was immense, compounded by the knowledge that their exploitation was not only condoned, but facilitated by the very society that enslaved them. An account from an unnamed black male slave detailed the existence of a brothel where he was regularly taken to service white women. He described the dehumanizing process of being paraded before these women, who would inspect him and other enslaved men, selecting them based on their physical attributes. The encounters that followed were fraught with violence and coercion, leaving lasting scars on his psyche. Interestingly, these brothels were run by white women who had been left by their husbands or were widows. They could run these brothels without facing any risks, as their clients, who were white women, cared more about their secrecy. Therefore, the location of these brothels and those who owned them were kept secret. It's because if any of them were caught, there was a risk that all the white women who came to those brothels could get revealed. What's more, because white women wanted strong and attractive black male slaves, the owners of the brothels would reach agreements with slave traders. They focused on bringing the most attractive black slaves to those women brothel owners for extra money. You should also know that because the owners of the brothels were also white women, they used these black male slaves for their own sexual satisfaction. In some cases, the black male slaves were also sent to the houses of white elite women during particular hours of the day, when their husbands were not at the mansions. Did you know that brothels existed where black male slaves were used for white women's sexual pleasures? Isn't it true that this part of black history is deliberately hidden because it embarrasses white men today? In the comment section right below, share what you have heard about this subject. Would you like us to make more videos? If yes, please support us by subscribing to the Black History Archives and clicking the bell icon. You can check out more videos on our channel too.